Good morning. My name is Gao. I am a research fellow at the Public Policy Institute of California. Thank you for tuning into our virtual program today, featuring the findings of our new report, Distance Learning Strategies in California Schools. The report, as well as the slides from today's presentation, are available on our website at ppic.org. We would like to thank the Sobrato Family Foundation for their support of this research and today's virtual event. As a public charity, PPIC does not take or support positions on any ballot measure or legislation, nor does it support, endorse, or oppose any political parties or candidates for public office. After my presentation, my colleague and co-author Laura Hill will moderate a panel discussion on how California school districts addressed remote learning in spring 2020 and strategies to improve instruction in the fall. And finally, we have set aside some time at the end of the program for audience Q&A. If you have a question for our speakers, please send an email to the address on the screen, ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. We would appreciate you including your name and organization along with your question. And with that, I will begin the presentation. The title of the report is Distance Learning Strategies in California Schools. My amazing research team includes Laura Hill, Julian Lafortune, and Emmanuel Pronti. We thank the Sobrato Family Foundation for their support. This work is a product of a researcher-practitioner partnership with the California Department of Education, and we thank the department for its collaboration on the survey instrument and survey dissemination. The pandemic continues to disrupt K-12 education in California. Early evidence shows that students have experienced significant learning loss in both English and math. Students in earlier grades are most affected. Data also show that Black, Latino, and low-income students, English learners, and students without internet access at home are falling further behind. Furthermore, there are growing concerns about student mental health due to extended school closures. More schools have reopened for in-person instruction, but many families, especially those in hard-hit communities, choose to stay in distance learning. Much remains to be done to support learning recovery. In this report, we hope to understand how districts handle distance learning, managed instruction, address learning loss, as well as the financial constraints and priorities. We rely on 3 data sources. Our primary data source is a survey of school districts. The survey was launched in mid-November 2020 and closed in mid-January 2021. 205 districts responded, and those districts in total served 50% of the state's K-12 student population. Respondent districts are more likely to be large, unified districts in urban areas, but they have similar shares of high-need students. We supplement the survey with respondent districts' learning continuity plans, which provide information on how student learning needs were addressed in the 2020 to 21 school year. Our last data source is the California sample of the Household Pulse Survey. The survey was conducted by the Census Bureau and asked the families about student access to the internet and devices from spring to fall 2020. And here are our findings. First, the digital divide persists. In this chart, we show the share of students with the internet always available for education purposes. The dark blue bars represent spring, the orange bars represent spring 2020, and the blue bars represent fall 2020. There is little improvement in internet access. A third of low-income students still do not have reliable internet access in fall 2020. And about 30% of Black and Latino students also lack reliable internet. In our survey, we asked districts to select the instructional models in fall 2020. And this slide shows the results based on district characteristics. Overall, 47% of districts were in remote, with all students in distance learning at the time of survey. However, districts with high shares of Black Latino students, English learners, and low-income students were less likely to be physically open. Districts with lower test scores before the pandemic were also less likely to offer in-person instruction. Districts were not prepared for distance learning when schools first closed in spring 2020. Since then, districts have invested significant resources to improve distance learning. As a result, most districts improved over spring in many areas, including the provision of internet or devices, teacher instruction, communication with students and families, monitoring student attendance, providing school meals in non-congregated settings, and providing extra support for English learners. In this slide, we look at distance learning instruction. Most students in grades 1 to 12 had at least 3 hours of instructional activity. This is an improvement from spring, where students in grades K to 5 would spend less than 3 hours on instructional activities. However, this is still below the state minimum. With Senate Bill 98, students in grades 4 to 12 must have 6 hours instructional minutes daily. For 77% of districts, at least half of the instruction was live. Most districts were focusing their remote content on new material. This represents a marked improvement from the spring, where nearly half of the teachers focused mostly or exclusively on reviewing content. In terms of what they were teaching, 2/3 of districts made efforts to align their instruction with the state English and math standards. Fewer districts aligned their instruction with the science or English language development standards. For 80% of districts, strategies to mitigate learning loss were considered a priority when they developed their 2020 to 21 budgets. Based on their learning continuity plans, districts have implemented a wide variety of programs. This slide summarizes the most popular ones. Most districts used assessments to measure student learning in fall 2020. Districts used a variety of assessments, with teacher and district developer assessments being the most popular. 66% of districts provided differentiated instruction in small groups to support student learning. 60% of districts provided access to core and supplemental curriculum, instructional materials, and online programs. This strategy was more popular among high Black Latino districts. About half of districts provided extended learning opportunities, such as evening classes, weekend classes, and summer school. 43% of districts integrated social emotional learning, or SEL, by providing SEL lessons, curriculum, and supplemental programs. Notably, 61% of high poverty districts provided SEL instruction. 42% of districts provided tutoring programs with teachers, peers, college students, and tutoring organizations. Tutoring was more popular among high Black Latino districts. Based on our survey, most districts provided additional resources to English learners during distance learning. 84% of districts provided small group instruction as an extra service, and 80% made efforts to communicate with families in their home language. 75% of districts offered extra time with an ELD teacher or aide, and close to 70% of districts offered designated or integrated instruction for English learners. Close to 60% of districts provided additional instructional materials, including digital resources, packets of instructional materials for recent immigrants, and special curriculum for long-term English learners. Districts turn to assessments of English proficiency less often, although these assessments appear to be more important in high percentage EL districts than in districts overall. Districts incurred significant new costs due to COVID-19. The majority of districts financed those expenditures using federal and state COVID relief money. Many respondent districts also found savings in their budgets or relied on cost savings from reducing or eliminating in-person school operations. Roughly a third use reserves to pay for additional expenditures. Relatively few districts relied on new revenue sources, and some also relied on staffing reductions, program cuts, or deferred maintenance. To conclude, we offer the following policy recommendations. First, sustain additional state and federal support for several years to support in-person instruction and accelerate student learning. Second, many of the state's highest need students still do not have adequate connectivity. Coordinated and continued efforts among federal and state governments will be key to eliminating the digital divide. Third, prioritize in-person instruction for English learners, students with disabilities, and foster children. More targeted resources and support to high-need schools will be key to leveling the playing field. Fourth, ensure funding and services to address mental health and enhance social-emotional learning. Last, expand extended learning opportunities for students, particularly those in underserved communities. Districts could extend the school year in summer 2021 and summer 2022 and provide targeted interventions. Establishing a statewide tutoring system could also help accelerate student learning and provide more opportunities for underserved and struggling students. This concludes my presentation. Please submit your questions to ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. Now I would like to turn it over to my colleague Laura Hill, who will introduce our distinguished panel.
Thank you, Nu, for your overview of the district's perspectives on their distance learning experience and their strategies to accelerate learning for students at what was the beginning of California's third wave of the pandemic. Now we're going to spend a little time getting the perspectives of 3 superintendents who've been in the throes of distance learning and reopening, and they'll reflect on the past year and share with us what they're thinking about with the remaining challenges and promise for the months and years ahead. So now it's my pleasure to introduce them each to you. First is Nancy Albaron, Superintendent of San Jose Unified. Next is Hilda Maldonado, Superintendent of Santa Barbara Unified. And also joining us is Ed Manansala, the Superintendent of the El Dorado County Office of Education. Thanks so much to each of you for joining us this morning. We're really looking forward to hearing more in-depth view of where we are with reopening, accelerating learning for students, and what lies ahead this fall. So what I'd like to do, if I could, is start off by asking each of you to spend a minute or so telling us sort of where your district, or Ed, in your case, many districts and your county office, where they are with reopening and who is in person, what sorts of students are in person right now, and if you can tell us anything about what has gone well or has been challenging about this. And Hilda, if you don't mind, I'd love to start with you.
Well, thank you for having me, Laura, and great question. Santa Barbara Unified is fully reopened. We started last week, TK to 6th grade, 5 days a week with an early release on Wednesdays. And this week, just yesterday, we went to 4 days a week with 7th through 12th grade due to the social distancing rules that allow us to basically have more students. So we were in hybrid learning for only a couple of weeks. I want to say about 3 weeks before we switched over to full 5 days or 4 days in secondary. And about 80%, 75 to 80% of our families selected in-person instruction. We have all types of kids back in school. So EMLs, foster youth, housing insecure, all our students are a variety of students. So we haven't really analyzed to see the 25% that are left at home. We did something a little creative in secondary. We did our master schedule for this spring semester with having in mind students and teachers being able to, in secondary, basically have both kids online and in the classroom at the same time. And so that allowed us to be able to pivot back and forth if we needed to. And that was a great work by my team to get everyone back on online and fully reopened.
Thanks, Hilda. Nancy, can you tell us a little bit about San Jose Unified?
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation. San Jose Unified is the largest district in Santa Clara County. We're about 30,000 students. And we open tomorrow, K-12, 41 schools, with about 37% of our students coming back in person. What we did was the board very early on set a prioritization criteria. And so the majority of our students coming back are our high need students. We are fully synchronous to the actual number of minutes that the ed code has required of schools. And so we believe one of the many reasons that families have chosen to stay home is because they have had their full instructional minutes under the supervision of the teacher since the beginning of the year. And so that the lesson is live streamed to the home. And, we've had a lot of success with it. Of course, there's been challenges, but I think for the most part, our families have been satisfied with the quality of the distance learning, particularly because the teacher is with the students the entire time, TK to 12. And so tomorrow we go 5 days a week with, we could have up to 50% of students in person, but only 37% of students requested to come back. So we were able to accommodate the majority of our families that wanted it at their own school. And we're really excited about seeing our students again. We did have students come back in February for distance learning support in school. And that was about 2,000 students that were having, challenges accessing their distance learning from home, or had some, attendance issues, other concerns. And so we were able to safely bring about 2,000 students back starting in February.
Thanks, Nancy. Ed, I've given you a tough job since you've got many districts to talk about, but I'll let you pick and choose how you're going to describe.
Thanks, Laura. I'll do my best. So first of all, just acknowledging Nancy and your return tomorrow, wishing you the best on that as well. So that's exciting to hear. For 15 years, I've been in urban education in the Sacramento area, but the last 8 years, approximately, I've been in El Dorado County as the county superintendent and supporting approximately 15 school districts. And currently in El Dorado County, it's predominantly a rural county. So if you think about as you leave Sacramento, and if you've ever traveled to South Lake Tahoe, you essentially have cut across El Dorado County in the majority of the districts. 14 districts are in full reentry, essentially 5 days a week. And we have one district that has decided to remain in an in-person hybrid model through the remainder of the year. I think what's important to know is that in August 2020, and I would say both in terms of our COVID rates, the general collaboration of the county, and also just the willfulness of the multiple districts, we had 3 districts that started in a full in-person model. But these districts are small. When I say small, I'm referring to 150 students or less. 5 were in an in-person model, hybrid model in August 2020, and then 7 were in distance learning. So we've had a pretty unique sampling of experiences. But this recent snapshot of the majority of our districts in an in-person full model has occurred in the months of March and April.
So some recent returns, but some going on for quite some time. It sounds like from your three districts and the county office you represent, Ed, there's quite a variety of statuses for reopening, which is very similar to what we saw in our survey.
That's right.
So this next question might be a little challenging to answer depending on what's going on right now where you are. But one thing that, of course, everyone is worried about is what gaps in student learning might look like now relative to a typical year. Are you all able to tell us a little bit about how you're assessing that and what you're seeing so far? Ed, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. So yes, I mean, I think that we've seen both. Again, I'm taking it from a different perspective because I'm sampling across 15 districts and really highlighting themes that we've seen, or even what I would describe as a continuum of data points. So just first of all, when you're looking at assessment, we have looked at assessments anywhere from, and these are assessments I'm sure you're familiar with, but Renaissance or Read 360 ELA and math, or Go Math, or even the teacher developed benchmarks, right? So these are the types of assessments that we're seeing across the county. But one thing that's interesting, there was one superintendent in Placerville Union School District who observed what I would describe as, like, right from the beginning, the families or the students that while they were in distance learning, those students who had supports already, so stable home in terms of continuity of parents in the home, or be it a grandparent or an individual, or may have participated in some type of extended learning partnership already. So that could be Boys and Girls Club, an extended day program before school or after school, but that had access to supports. We did not see too much of a decrease in what we would consider learning loss. For those who did not have that type of support, especially when we were looking at things through an equity lens, we have a superintendent up in the North County who has seen roughly 6 months of loss from his perspective, based in terms of what he's seen. So it's been, we've seen a continuum of students and schools that have remained, depending on the types of supports that have existed, as well as those who've fallen behind.
Thanks, Ed. Hilda, can you fill us in a little bit about Santa Barbara?
Yes, and I do want to add, Laura, that I am brand new superintendent to Santa Barbara, started July 1st in the beginning of the pandemic. So I think my perspective is going to be a little tainted from that, or I just want to make sure that I say that. Some of the things that were said by Ed are similar in terms of reading, mathematics. We also use Renaissance. We have several challenges in looking at data across the system, because there is a need for us to have a data platform to be able to pull out reports. So we worked a lot on that issue, which kept us from really seeing how are kids doing. And so that's my biggest question. So how do we know, how kids are doing? How do we look at data across the system? It is 17 schools, 14,000 students in Santa Barbara Unified, and we're the second largest in the county. I finally got a hold of some reading scores, which looks like it's about 15 to 20% below what would have been normally during this time of the year. But again, the assessment scheduling, the delivery and all of that is still a little bit, it's not in a real cadence that helps us do some real comparison data, but nothing that we haven't seen before. There is a huge gap between our 60% Latino students and the rest is 30% white, about 6% Asian, and the gap exists and persists. So we didn't see a lot of difference there. I do want to say that the LPAC assessment, for the first time, we've asked teachers to administer that. And I didn't talk about the challenges earlier, but that would have been one of the challenges with reopening and instructional time, and asking teachers to deliver the LPAC. In terms of assessing how students are doing relative to a typical year. So there's been some changes in those spaces. The other one is we did adopt, and I know we're going to probably get to this question a little later, but we're in the beginning stages of delivering a designated ELD program, which was adopted this year to coincide with our FOSS science curriculum. And so those are some of the things that we're doing, but I haven't been able to really wrap my head around assessment data the way that I'm used to, as you know, from being in Los Angeles Unified.
Thanks, Hilda. That's helpful. And just for our audience, the LPAC is the assessment that's used annually for English learners in California. And I think it was this year that we've moved to having an online option for the first time. So that'll be, and now teachers are helping administer it as well, as Hilda reported. Nancy, is there anything you'd like to add about gaps in San Jose Unified? I know your students aren't back in the doors yet, but just if you have any perspective so far.
Yeah, I would say that in San Jose Unified, it's much like the trend that we're seeing across the country, particularly across urban districts. We have seen a decrease both in math and English language arts in our students, particularly our students of color. Nothing more dramatic. I mean, it's about 5 months off in math for historical average, from the historical average, and then about a month in reading. But I think some of the concerns that we have about that is the environment students are testing in. There is connectivity issue, the stability of the internet connection. And the other piece that we spent some time on, and when we talk about assessments, we talk about formal assessments in academic areas, but I think what we've really been focused on is the social and emotional, and really conducting the SDQ survey to make sure that we having a good sense of where our students are around their social and emotional well-being. We know from just countless conversations that we've had both with families and with students that many of our students are living in a tremendous amount of distress. I mean, they already live in distress in normal times, but I think this situation has really exacerbated that. And so we're really paying more attention to that, because we believe that needs to be addressed first and foremost, so then students can have what they need to be able to access their learning.
And is the SDQ something that is used across districts? Sorry to be unfamiliar.
It's the Strengths Difficulties Questionnaire. And I know a lot of districts do use it. We had been using it in the past more informally at the school site level, but we have now been shifting toward doing it K-12 and making sure that we do it systematically so that we have information on students' well-being. One of the things that we saw with the administration of that is at the secondary level, students take it on their own. And so we were seeing that particularly around grading time, there was significant increases. And so being mindful of that and creating some strategies so that we can talk about those things with students. We don't want them to be stressed in normal times, but particularly now, it is really, really a challenge, and we want to be responsive to that data.
Thanks, Nancy. I think let's stay on this theme. Hilda, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about what you might be seeing with the social, emotional well-being, student mental health, that would be helpful.
So similarly, we have seen a slight, but not too big of an increase in social emotional. We have contracts with several nonprofit agencies that work closely with the school district here in addressing family needs. We held a lot of parent workshops, like parenting during a pandemic, and how to work with your students and technology and things like that. I just checked in with my assistant superintendent on that, and she said, compared to a typical year, it's not that different, but there has been a lot of prior work before I arrived as superintendent here. In Santa Barbara, there had been some events in prior years that led them to do a lot of increased work around like sources of strength, signs of suicide, a lot of mental health outreach to students and families. There's a collaborative in our community that also does a lot of work on student mental health. I will say that one of the areas that needs a lot of improvement is being able to do it in a language that families can access. And so a lot of outreach that we did which was a slightly different take, was to use an agency called Promotoras. I'm not sure if they exist across the state, but Promotoras Network is a network of Latino parents who are trained in the different health issues in the community and that are able to do some outreach. Now, it was a challenge because of COVID, because normally they would be out in the community really finding people in the spaces and places that they exist in. But there was enough of those connections that they were able to do some of that outreach for us, which was a different take on doing the typical. So I find in this district that I'm challenged with doing our, for lack of a better word, our typical outreach to parents using Parent Square emails to send out information, especially during the pandemic. And then thinking about, well, how do parents that don't have the access to technology, don't use email because their jobs don't require it, access this information? We can't do flyers, for example, the way we typically would. Phone calls sometimes help. So that's where we had to get very creative in getting out to people to tell us what kinds of issues they were having in the health area, which was either testing for COVID, or supporting them with mental health issues. So just different strategies is what I think I would say we tried to implement.
Thanks, Hilda. Ed, do you have anything that you might add about student mental health?
Sure, I'll just add a few more points, but I think one thing just to acknowledge, and it's again great timing to be reflecting on the past year. You know, we've been dealing with COVID for the last 13 months, and there's been an incredible toll, and not just on our students, but our teachers and our administrators and even superintendents. And we're seeing the impact of that, but that's a different study. And in respect to students, I think we've seen 3 areas in particular. Drug use has increased anxiety and suicidal ideation. And on the drug use standpoint, while we have been dealing with issues around vaping, we're seeing an uptick around marijuana. We think that just with greater flexibility of time, in one sense, for students outside of school, has increased that challenge, if you will. And the last part that I would touch on, this idea of increased anxiety, we're seeing that. And there's just this idea of how students, especially those who have been in distance learning and making the transition back, were been perseverating around issues around COVID, hand washing, social distancing. There's so many factors that are now somewhat stressors or distractors just to what we would consider a normal learning environment.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, it's a real good point to remember. Of course, we're focused on students in the study, but the stresses of COVID are obviously in students' families and throughout the whole system that's working to educate kids right now. So we appreciate you guys taking the time to be with us when you have a million other things to do, all related to the pandemic and beyond. I also just want to take a quick pause to remind our audience that there will be an opportunity to have some questions answered from the audience. Please submit your questions now or whenever you think of them to PPIC event questions@gmail.com. And luckily, we still have some more time for a panel conversation, so I'm going to keep that going. I'd love to go back a little bit to the question of student learning and what you all might be thinking about how you might accelerate learning for students in the cases where you feel like there are gaps that need to be recovered. And I'm particularly interested in hearing a bit about how equity concerns feature into your plans. If you're able to highlight anything related to English learners, emergent bilingual students, students of color, students with disabilities, any of those topics would be great. And Hilda, do you mind taking a first stab at that?
Okay, I'll take a first stab. Again, I came into the district to inherit a lot of, I inherited an equity agenda, and that was part of my draw to come to Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara Unified it adopted ethnic studies as a graduation requirement in 2018. And so I think in terms of equity concerns and plans, that's been a big drive for the district in grades 7 to 12. We've gotten some pushback. We do have a community that has many different types of thinking or thoughts around ethnic studies and equity issues. I would say that that's been a big driver that took a lot of our attention, and that's for grades 7 to 12. And that would be for kids starting in the 9th grade this year as a graduation requirement. As far as we call them EMLs, emergent multilinguals, not English learners in Santa Barbara Unified. That's part of another plan that was adopted before I arrived called the Meta Plan, multilingual plan. And I think one of the things I found is there is a drive to create dual language programs, but not a well-defined English learner or emergent multilingual program. So when we think about the 15% of English learners, about 2,000 kids, we're looking at only 48 being enrolled in a dual language program and the rest not really having, again, we just adopted designated ELD in elementary. And so the elementary space is just in dire need of well-defined instructional program with strategies that can accelerate learning for students. The great news is we have teachers, because of a lot of work that's been done around implicit bias leading up to adoption of ethnic studies and the equity agenda, teachers ripe for learning more about how to do that work. So we're planning a summer institute for them. And so I think we're at the beginning stages of that accelerated learning. We've also haven't historically offered summer school for elementary school kids, which we will be doing this year. So more work around after-school tutoring, more work around professional learning for teachers, more work around preparing for a robust summer school program.
Great, thanks, Hilda. Nancy, is there anything that you'd like to tell us about San Jose? And
I think much like Hilda, I've been really fortunate to be in an organization. This is, I think, my 20th year in San Jose that's been on this equity journey for some time now. One of the first moves that the board made early on was to update our equity policy. We have an equity board policy. We were one of the first in the country to adopt one in 2010, and they thought this was the time to revisit that policy and update it. That policy basically allocates resources based on need and signals to the entire organization and the community that this is going to be the criteria that's going to guide the decision making. And so that decision to revisit it in such a strategic way really told our community when they were most tuned into board meetings and district business but resources were going to be allocated, whether it was funds, time, criteria for enrollment. And so I think that conversation very early on helped pave the way for how the decisions were going to be made. And so as we developed our enrollment for a return to in-person, our community knew that the highest need students would be prioritized. The schools with the greatest need would be receiving a greater amount of funds. For summer school, people are aware that those are the students that are going to be prioritized. One of the things that's very unique about San Jose is that we are a large district, but we're also a very diverse district. We have tremendous affluence in the south, and then we have great need in the north. And our central is a more diverse socioeconomic community. But I think having all the needs that our different constituents have and trying to balance those in a way where you have sometimes some competing interests, I think a policy that guides that decision making so that you always have an anchor that's guiding you and helping resolve some of that tension as they arise.
That's great, Nancy. I think we mentioned resources and how you have a plan for the district to allocate towards the students that have the most need. But many districts are also seeing a lot more resources, and maybe unexpectedly so, after our early the early predictions about what COVID was going to do to the state budget. I'm just wondering if any of you would like to comment on how you might be using any of the extra federal or state COVID funding, like the reopening or federal or the federal stimulus funds.
So I think go ahead. Sorry.
Nancy, why don't you go?
Oh, I'm sorry. My video cut out, so I didn't know who was going. In San Jose Unified, we're fortunate that unlike a lot of large urbans, we have not had a structural deficit, and so this influence of additional funding is greatly appreciated. However, we also know that there are some things that you can't fund long term. So we're trying to be incredibly strategic with the funds that are coming in. And so one of the things, of course, is technology and making sure that we are one-to-one, making sure that all of our families that need it have connectivity. And we've been very successful in doing that. But I think that that's sort of a Band-Aid approach. There has to be a state response or a response greater than a school district to address that. We believe it's like a utility that needs to be prioritized. And COVID has shown us what happens when it's not. So I do think that we will continue to put funds there. PPE, of course, additional counseling for our students. While we have counselors across all of our schools, we know that there's still a need for more. But I think because we're in the Bay Area, one of like many school districts who struggle with staffing, there's shortages of teachers in normal times, shortages of counselors in normal times, but particularly in this area, in a pandemic, people are not, our service providers are also struggling to find employees. And so we're thinking about how do we respond to all of these needs, given the workforce shortages that we face in this area, because it's very expensive to live in.
Hilda, are you seeing something similar in San Jose, in Santa Barbara? Sorry.
Yeah, similar to Nancy, the technology, the investments in staffing, the investments. For us, it's about having, again, I saw a great need in elementary, in bilingual paraeducators. One of the things we want to invest in that we feel is important because of the way we're organizing the school district is MTSS. We want to invest into a 3-year model of really an expectation of a good MTSS system at every single school.
Can you explain MTSS for folks who might not be?
Sorry, multi-tiered system of support. We have been found to be significant disproportionate in the number of Latino students identified in special education in grades K-3. And because of that disparate treatment of children, we wanted to be sure that every school had a multi-tiered system of support. And we want to invest in a core of people that are going to do that work for the next 3 years and build capacity such that at the end of 3 years, it lives in the system and is absorbed as part of the way we do business in schools. We also have an amazing program in the secondary schools, in high school particularly, who are working on providing opportunities and preparation through AVID. So we want to invest and expand that program. We currently have it targeted for first-gen students that go to college, but we want to expand it to second, third generation Latinos because we know, again, that there's an inequity in the college preparation rates. And we're looking to align our A through G with our graduation requirements. So those folks and an expansion of supports in that system is what we want to do as part of strategic investments for 3 years. In addition to what Nancy mentioned, the technology, the PPE and all of that. We are lucky that we are 100% technology devices district. They're all iPads, so we had one for every child. We do have issues with connectivity in the poorer parts of the city, which we don't hear a lot about in Santa Barbara. People think of it as this place where that doesn't exist, but it does. So we invested money in hotspots for certain areas of the city and solar powered hotspots for our youth who are homeless as well. So those are the ways that we're looking at our investments to address it. But like Nancy, we are a basic aid school district, so we don't necessarily rely always on LCFF funding. But we do believe that that's a need for additional investments in internet connectivity as a utility. I just want to echo Nancy's point. It's super important.
Well, thanks to you both. Now I'm going to ask a few questions about the fall and beyond. And Ed, I'm going to pivot to you first. How important is it, do you think, that we get all or most children back inside school buildings for in-person instruction this fall?
I think it's very important. We saw that there was great consequence right out in March, April 2020, when the school systems were shifting to distance learning. It had immediate impact on individual students just in respect to social isolation, the technology gaps, the impact on families, the impact on childcare, the impact on businesses, even to county-wide services. I mean, it's like an engine trying to function without any level of oil or water, right? Like the education system has been incredibly important, I think, to any local community, county, or state as a whole. So I think, though, the students, I on a regular basis, month to month, since August 2020 to present, or listening to the voices of students, anywhere from our high school students right down to, I was in a preschool class last week. And you listen to the class of 2021, right, these seniors, and they will say that they've encountered a lot of loss and hurt and challenge. You just think about them as juniors last year, and some of them have not fully returned and some are returning now. So just the idea of starting school, in the fall in a distance learning format would be really difficult. So again, I think it's incredibly important to return.
Hilda, do you have a perspective you'd like to add?
I do agree with Ed that it's super important. I mean, again, we're pretty close to most everyone. I guess we're a pretty large number of people coming back. I will say that there are some kids that are thriving in the distance learning model. Maybe some of so everything Ed said, yes. And I think there's kids that I have found who their grades have gone up, their participation has gone up, and it's probably more of our introverted students who we want to be mindful that they definitely want to stay in distance learning. So we're looking at innovating in that space and thinking about maintaining some distance learning program available for that choice to be available to our families. I do want to say that because families engage with school districts in different ways, we heard a lot from our more affluent families who really wanted us to open much more quickly than others. In our surveys of parents and teachers, we found that our teachers were not so ready in the fall. Our parents were way more ready in the fall than our teachers. So we were really mindful of, figuring out what was holding teachers back. And like everyone else in the world, there was fear, anxiety, and all of that. But I have found that as I walked through schools, I was just in a junior high school this morning, there seems to be a lot of joy coming out of being in person, because at the end of the day, our work is in person and it's a people business. And I think that just being very mindful of that, I feel that there's been a larger conversation started in Santa Barbara about the importance of relationships, relationship building, and really listening and keying in on how kids are feeling, even if it's through Zoom. So I think that's the beauty, or I don't know, I'm an optimist. So I think I'm looking for those bright spots.
Thanks, Hilda. Nancy, how about you? And I think I'll ask another question as a part of this. How important is it? And then what can the state do to support reopening efforts?
I think we think obviously it is the best place for students to be, particularly the younger students, that relationship with their teacher and being in school and just having those opportunities to interact that they can't create like a high school student that can, at times go off and socialize with their friends for some time. I think that it is definitely our favorite place for students to be, but also recognizing and being really mindful that approach does not work for every student. And, in the conversations that I've had with students, some of them have shared that they've really thrived in a distance learning environment and would prefer to have that option available. So I think just being mindful that it's not a one size fits all. And thinking about how do you build a robust option for those students that can access distance learning in a way that they too feel connected to their school, but also in an environment that works best for them. And what can the state do? I think in normal times, we're a highly regulated sector. There is nothing we can do. Everything that we do is pretty much dictated: number of days, number of minutes, the LCAP template. We don't have options around those things. And yet in this pandemic and under this crisis, we have had to decision make around things that we don't normally decide on. And so what I would hope is that we have, as soon as possible, some clarity about what are the options that we have to offer, what are the number of minutes that we need to do, because we need to build those schedules. We need to enroll students in program. We need to assign staff to their schools, their classrooms, their grades, their courses. And so I think all of that is really dependent on sort of the rule book for the fall. And so I urge those that have the decision-making authority around this to let us know as soon as possible, because we really need to get going.
Ed and Hilda, do you have anything to add about things the state might do to support?
Again, my colleague Nancy just ditto everything she said. The only thing I would add is that we learned that we can shift quickly. And I think that we should keep that lesson, and we should challenge our state and our regulated bodies to know that it can be done, and it can be done quickly when we put students at the center of our decisions. And this proved that to me and to others. And I think that that's a lesson I would like to keep, along with everything Nancy has mentioned.
So agree with what was said. I think one add would be our partnership with the California Department of Public Health is really important. So this idea of communication and consistency, I think, becomes really important. It was one significant challenge in this last year was the inconsistency of messaging, where guidelines were shifting when we were trying to balance a messaging from the CDC at the federal level, California Department of Public Health, and then the work that we're doing at the counties, and of course in collaboration with our districts. So greater level of partnership and consistency of communication.
Great. Then the last question I want to ask you all is something, looking ahead, and I think we've kind of started to touch on this a bit, but my question was about if there's anything from this distance learning or hybrid learning year that you will want to keep as we return to much more of an in-person schedule, hopefully sometime this fall. You guys have just mentioned a lot about, keeping some way of persisting with distance learning, which seems to dovetail with a lot of interests that we're hearing from folks across the state about that. So I'll stop answering the question for you all. What kinds of things do you think you might want to keep going forward once we're back to more in person?
So I think what was mentioned that I really would love to keep is the equitable grading practices, and the fact that we did realize that grading is a major area of refinement. Lowering class size, more small group instruction. We found that was very effective in ways to think about instruction in a way that meets students' needs. A lot of the technology tools, again, this morning I was watching a teacher using, even in person with most of the kids in the classroom, using Kahoots and Padlet to really engage students in a way that's different. The kids were excited about learning. Learning management systems, less paper, more things uploaded for teachers to use and kids. In school schedules, we found that block scheduling in high school really provided more opportunities for us to meet student needs. We'd love to be able to explore that space a little bit more.
Nancy or Ed?
I think in San Jose, I agree a lot of the things that Hilda mentioned, but I think for us, I think one of the biggest learnings was this emphasis on the relational. Teaching and learning is highly relational. We know that the nucleus of the system is the classroom, and that relationship between the teacher and the student, but not just the teacher and the student, the relationship that the staff at the school site and the district have with families. We really saw what how important it was to know every student by name, by strength, and by need. And really checking in with families. We had 11,000 calls that were made to all of our Title I students. We repositioned staff, like, for example, our bus drivers that were not driving routes. They helped with making calls, with going to the homes and delivering supplies, and just showing families that you care, that you can empathize with a lot of the situations that they're on, and that you are willing to work tirelessly to connect them with resources. They may not be within our sphere of influence, some of those things that they need, but just knowing, having heightened awareness that need exists. Really, we saw a lot of compassion in the instruction that was being delivered as teachers were able to see and hear what many of our students are living every day. And I think that is an element that we're thinking about. How do we maintain that level of connection? Because we know it matters. There's not assessments we can give in that area necessarily, but we know that when a student believes every adult that they interact with has high expectations of them and is willing to work tirelessly to support them, they will rise to the occasion.
Thanks, Nancy. Do you have anything to say about moving forward?
Definitely. So
yeah,
I think in the idea, harmonizing with what Nancy and Hilda are speaking to, but this idea of well-being and learning, again, while we're focusing on the students, what we've seen is that we need to create a system that is truly empathetic and listening. Like the students who are coming back, the teachers who are coming back, individually have been impacted in some way. And we just can't make any assumptions. So I think we've benefited from that process. I think we are listening well beyond surveys, but just in terms of interactive type of meetings with individuals who have had concerns, that has paid off in a sense of getting to a place of being able to re-enter. And even at the point of re-entry, staff and students and families are dealing with a significant amount of fear concern. So being able to wrap around our students, families, as well as our educators becomes really important. I am concerned for the amount of retirements that I'm seeing and transitions with leaders in particular, principals and superintendents, in a way that I haven't seen before. And I think it's just been a consequence of the toll. So again, a system that becomes really supportive. And the last thing I'd say, just on a real practical level, teachers being able to spend one-on-one time with students or in small group instruction has just been beneficial with these additional dollars, and the strategies have really helped. So we're really trying to look at how we can keep those types of strategies in place, not only now, but over the next 2, 3, 4 years.
Well, thanks very much for those answers. I've gotten to the end of the questions that I had ready, and now we have some time for audience Q&As. If you haven't had a chance to pop those in to the email PPIC event questions@gmail.com, go ahead and do that now. I do have what probably is a quickish question, but an audience question from someone in Sacramento would like to know if distance learning is here to stay in some form or another. It sounds like in many cases you all agree that having some option to do that is a good idea. So then the specific question I'll direct to you all now is, what do you think the best way is to monitor attendance and making sure students are progressing if they are choosing distance learning? And I'll just see who most wants to answer it.
I would say the best way to monitor is completion of work and evidence of learning that we have new ways of looking at now. That's my immediate answer.
Okay, I'm going to ask another audience question. How does the broadened eligibility for vaccines now affect districts' approaches to reopening? So looking ahead, maybe to next fall, do you think your district, or do you think districts in general, will require vaccinations for in-person attendance? Ed, do you have a thought about that?
Sure. I don't anticipate the requirement of vaccinations, but I do know that even in access to those who are interested in receiving the vaccine has been a real important piece in creating a contributing to a safe environment for the individuals who have been vaccinated as well as the system as a whole. So we felt that shift when we were able to get to a place of full access. For the students, one area that we are dealing with around vaccinations and surveillance testing in particular, is around athletics activities and extracurricular activities. There's a lot of challenges there. So, that's a big question, and I think we are starting to play that out now. But again, going full circle, I don't think it'll be a requirement by fall, and I know that is a topic at hand.
I want to say that in Santa Barbara, with vaccination, when we first started doing it with our adults in the system, one of the things our county superintendent had us all agree on was an equity-based approach to who gets vaccinated first. And so we really made it a point, we all agreed as superintendents in Santa Barbara County to vaccinate our most highest impacted community, which started with our food service workers, our maintenance workers, who also happen to be our mostly Latino people of color in our school district. And then we moved over to our teachers and others. We also, and now that we're looking at the students, we are seeing a lot of student athletes having the vaccine, especially the ones that are 16 or over. That's at the beginning stages, but we also are trying to take a more localized approach and really looking at the geography, who are the highest impacted communities that we need to get to vaccines first. And this technology question really comes into play, because you need to have technology access to get enrolled and to get an appointment to be vaccinated. And so for the fall, I feel pretty confident. We got 80% of our staff vaccinated. 11% or so told us they would not take the vaccine. But at the end of the day, I think that we feel comfortable with the rates of vaccinations here, and then just the approach of overall our counties with a very equity lens approach to the testing and vaccines.
Nancy, do you have any thoughts you've had?
We had, luckily, because large districts did get an allocation of vaccines. And so we did receive in early February, we received, vaccination appointment codes from the state. And so we were able, close to 90% of our staff has been vaccinated. And we started with the group that was already in person with students. The first wave of students we brought back at the end of February. And I think our staff has been incredibly supportive of being vaccinated. I agree, I don't see a requirement coming, but you never know, tuberculosis tests are required to get hired. So, that might be something else the state might look at. But we also recognize some people either can't get the vaccine or for a variety of other reasons have chosen not to. And so we just have to be respectful of people's choices, but at the same time, do everything that we can to put in the mitigation factors to keep everybody safe and healthy.
Thank you so much to all of you. We really learned a lot from hearing from each of the three of you. We have run out of time to continue on with questions, so I'm going to just thank you so much for your reflections of this really incredible and unpredictable and difficult year, and the look ahead that you've each provided for what is promising and what will remain challenging. So I want to thank you all for joining us this morning, and thank you again to our funder, the Sobrato Family Foundation. And thank you to all of you who are joining us online today. And if you did pre-register for the event, you'll get a survey later today, so you will hopefully be able to tell us how we did and what we might improve on. And thank you so much. Be well, stay safe, and have a good day.